All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Font Laurier Church. I'm Reverend Leah Atkinson-Belinsky, she, her. If you're joining us in person or online, that's what I usually say on Sunday mornings, but I know there are people joining us online, and I really appreciate you being here, and I'm kind of overwhelmed by how much people have wanted to hear, and that makes my heart feel good, too, about what's happening in Minneapolis, and from the perspective of one person that was there for a few days. And there are many other perspectives from people that are living the experience there that are important to listen to as well. But I can tell you a little bit about my trip. So tonight I have some stories and I have some observations. I have some teachings and some trainings. I'll tell you about the trip and the structure of the trip to kind of orient you a little bit. But I thought that first we could start with a little bit of centering. I know that there might be people that are joining us here in person or online that are not of the Christian faith, but I thought maybe we could do some breathing together and just kind of root ourselves in this space, because we live in a world that is really very messed up. And we are existing sometimes in a perpetual state of anxiety. And so let's just take some deep breaths here. And then I'll give you some words, and if you'll repeat them back to me, that would be great. And just continue your deep breathing and repeat after me. May I be safe. May I be healthy. May I be held in loving kindness. May you be safe. May you be healthy. May you be held in loving kindness. May we be safe. May we be healthy. May we be held in loving kindness. Thank you. For anyone who might be joining us who is not steeped in the Christian tradition, it might be a little jarring, a little disorienting to hear a pastor talk about going to Minneapolis, maybe because there are a lot of Christian voices in our nation that are louder than the voice of a liberal Christian, I'll say, and so a little orienting in the faith that I practice. I am a follower of Jesus. I'm not just a believer in Jesus, but a follower. So I pay attention to the things that he taught. I pay very close attention to the things that he taught. And I pay closer attention to the things that he taught by also listening to the prophets that came before him who influenced his beliefs. And I listen to their cries for justice, and I look for the overarching messages in the Bible rather than the scriptures that can be cherry-picked and twisted to fit into whatever I want them to justify in today's world. And within that, I see calls to love our neighbor over and over and over and over again. I hear calls for us to embrace loving kindness like our God, the agape love of our God. I hear calls for us to raise our voices when things are not well in this world. And I hear calls for us to not just get to heaven, but for us to bring heaven to earth. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so those are grounding places for what I might share with you tonight, so that you might know that I am sharing this from the perspective of a faith leader, not just a person who seems to think a certain way, but that my faith is where I am rooting myself in what I share. So with that, I'd like to actually read you a statement before I get into my stories from Matt Moberg, who is the chaplain for the Minnesota Timberwolves, because I think it speaks well to the call that is placed upon me as a Christian and upon all of us who are people of faith. If you're a church posting today prayers for peace and unity, while my city bleeds in the street, miss me with that softness you only wear when it costs you nothing. Don't dress up avoidance as holiness. Don't call silence peacemaking. Don't light a candle and think it substitutes for showing up. Tonight, an ICE agent took a photo of me next to my car, looked me in the eye, and told me, "We'll be seeing you soon." Not metaphor, not hyperbole, a threat dressed up in a badge and a paycheck. Peace isn't what you ask for when the boot is already on someone's neck. Peace is what the powerful ask for when they don't want to be interrupted. Unity isn't neutral. Unity that refuses to name violence is just loyalty to the ones holding the weapons. Stop using scripture like chloroform. Stop calling your fear wisdom. Stop pretending Jesus was crucified because he preached good vibes and personal growth. You don't get to quote scripture like a lullaby while injustice stays wide awake. You don't get to ask God to heal the land if you won't even look at the wound. There is a kind of peace that only exists because it refuses to tell the truth. That peace is a lie, and lies don't grow anything worth saving. The scriptures you love weren't written to keep things calm. They were written to set things right. And sometimes the most faithful thing you can do is stop praying around the pain and start standing inside it. If that makes you uncomfortable, good. So this time last week, or actually 2 weeks ago, I didn't know I was going on this trip. 2 weeks ago, Friday, I didn't know I was going on this trip. On not last Thursday, but the Thursday prior, an organization in Minneapolis that's very well known, very well thought of by the interfaith community there, they had a board meeting and they looked around the table and somebody said, "We need help. Do you think that we could put an event together very quickly and call interfaith leaders from across the country to come?" And someone said yes, and then other people said yes. And then they said, "Well, let's do it." And the very next day, there was a call out, and I had a clergy colleague of mine send it to a group that I'm in and said, "We need you here. Can you come?" And I secured childcare and then booked my plane ticket and said, "Yes, I'll come," and then put it out to the conference of our churches in the Pacific Northwest Conference of the United Church of Christ and said, "Who else wants to go with me?" And by the end of the day, on Friday, we had 8 of us. We had enough that we could book an Airbnb, save money because, clergy are not rich. And by the end of the weekend, we had 11. By Sunday morning, the event had reached its capacity for the space that it was going to be held in, and they had to pause the registrations and find another church. And so they called up another downtown church in Minneapolis that's rather large, and the church said, "Hey, can we come and take over your entire building for this period of time for this event?" And they said, "Yes, of course you can." And so they opened the registration back up, and the registration was open for not even another 24 hours before it filled up again. And so we ended up with 650 clergy and faith leaders from across the United States that gathered in Minneapolis last week. And there were more than that came, actually. Some of them booked their plane tickets and then found out they were on the waiting list. And so another organization stepped forward to host more clergy, more faith leaders, more people of faith who were coming to stand in support with the people of Minneapolis and St. Paul. And then there were others that came that didn't hook up with an organization, but were there present anyway. And the organization that I was with put together in that very short time, not just an event for us to come to and hear a bunch of speakers talk and share their experiences, but they put together trainings, and they put together host homes, and they found couches for clergy that couldn't afford hotels. They put together meals. They put together outings to various synagogues and churches where we could go and they would feed us. They put together experiences and advocacy trainings, and they put together acts of civil disobedience if we so chose to engage in those. And they also put together tables and tables and tables of coats and long johns and gloves and hats, because they knew that those of us coming from warmer climates don't know what the heck we're doing when we go into an environment where it's forecasted to be negative 20, negative 30 degrees. And they had all of this ready for us, all of it. And we came in, and all that generosity, all that can-do mentality was so obvious to us, but the other thing that was obvious to us was how tired they were, how exhausted they are. Because Minneapolis, St. Paul is truly a city that is under siege. On the first day that I was there, we engaged in a good amount of training with one another, some orientation. We heard from a Dakota man who told us about Podote, the site of the confluence of the Minnesota and the Mississippi rivers, and this is a sacred site of a site where the Dakota people tell their creation story. That's where their creation story is set. And they talked about how upsetting it is for them to experience again and again the trauma of colonialism revisited in new ways, wrapped up in new fashions. When you look at, if you were to take an aerial view of the Podote, the confluence there is the fort that was there when white people came in and pushed the Native Americans out of that area. And then there's the Whipple building, the place where the detention center is set, and the courthouses. And so an aerial view shows you oppression, like right there on the sacred Holy Land. And there is work being done around the site of the fort to redo some of that, but the Whipple building is one that's standing there. And is set in such a stark way, at contrast with something that should be so beautiful to the people there. So I engaged in training that first day, and then we went got on buses, and they were watching actually that day because we were supposed to be going to do a protest at the Whipple building, but besides having all the people that were there to engage in training and make sure that our needs were met, they also had people who were on the ground at the Whipple building, just volunteers, all volunteers, on the ground at the Whipple building, monitoring the temperature of how things were, because it changes on a daily basis, with what's going to be allowed as far as our right to protest and what's not. And so it was determined, they got the call that it was not, the temperature was not good for a bunch of clergy to, 5 busloads of clergy to show up at the Whipple building and engage actually it was just a prayer we were supposed to engage in there, but they didn't think it would be safe. So instead they changed directions, and we all went to different neighborhoods and went on ice patrol. So what this consisted of was simply all of us carrying whistles And I went with Reverend Lisa Horst Clark from Bellevue, and the we went out by twos, send them out 2 by 2. And we just walked through the neighborhood and just went through the neighborhood and just, looked and prayed and kept our eyes open and watched. And as Lisa and I came back, we were finishing our ICE patrol, and we came back and we gathered with some other clergy in the shelter of a bus stop with an overhang on it, and some side glass walls, because we were still getting accustomed to how freezing cold it was. And we're standing there talking and asking, what other people saw and everything. And all of a sudden, these 3 clergy run up to us, and they're out of breath, catching their breath, and they share with us that they had just interrupted an abduction. And as we say, where was it? And they said, it was right there, it was right behind you. And so we were standing at this bus stop, and it was in front of a strip mall, like an L-shaped strip mall like this. And at the other end of the parking, there had been a van with a woman and a pregnant woman and her children in it. And all of a sudden, ICE vehicles pulled up and surrounded it, and they all got out. I was told it was 12 agents that got out. And the clergy, untrained from other places in the country, started blowing their whistles, and they knew blow your whistle and get when ICE agents get out of their car and start your video on your phone. So they did that, and they ran a little too enthusiastically, though, toward the ICE agents. And they were immediately told, you back up, you don't come too close, as you can expect. And so they did. They kept their distance, and they video recorded. And in less than 60 seconds from when the SUVs arrived to when they left, that's all it took, 60 seconds. And they're not quite sure if the ICE vehicles left, the ICE agents left because the woman produced whatever the right papers are, or whether it was because they were making a lot of ruckus and that there were others of us, within sight that could join that ruckus. But it was 60 seconds and they were gone. It was that quick. And I know at the rally speech that I gave last night, people were, I was at the end, so everyone was used to kind of whooping and hollering and everything, and I shared that, and people saw that as good news. But to me, that's terrifying news. It's terrifying news that can happen within 60 seconds. And that's how quick and sneaky this can be, and how hard it is for people to observe. And adding to the difficulty of how hard it is to observe, I shared at the rally that I didn't see it. I was right there, and it was in the parking lot behind me, and I didn't see it happen. I had to listen to other clergy that weren't in the bus area tell me about what happened, because it happened so quickly, and with the noise of the avenue in front of us and other conversation that was going on, we didn't see it happen. It's really easy to not notice these things, and so that's why there are people, the community, rising up and seeking to keep eyes open, to be observers to what is happening, obeying the law, following the law, doing what the ICE agents tell them to, but observing, to be witnesses to things that are not right according to our beliefs of faith, and others just general beliefs if they're not people of faith. So that was shocking to us. And I mean, we had over 100 clergy within a couple blocks of that happening. And it happened right there because that's how bold things have become in Minneapolis. On Friday, that evening, I'll go back to the Thursday evening. That evening, we went to, because our church is, the United Church of Christ is LGBTQ affirming and celebrating. We went to a transgender affirming worship service for people in the community that happened to be taking place that night. And as we were going there, we took Lyft rides everywhere. We were told, don't rent a car, especially don't rent from Enterprise because they're in cooperation with ICE right now. Don't stay at Hilton hotels, don't fly Delta. Look for the companies that are in cooperation with things that you don't agree with. And so we were taking Lyfts everywhere, and we had some really amazing conversations with immigrants in the community. And the driver that drove us to the church that night for the service, when he found out, he asked us where we were from and what we were doing, and when he found out why we were there, and he found out that we were from Seattle, the four of us in that particular car, he was overwhelmed that we would have come that far, and he said, I can't believe that you came all that way. And he said many things to us, including, Seattle has the third largest Somali population in the United States. You all should prepare. But he also said this. He said, I can't believe that you all came this far. You did that for my family. You did that for my community. You did that for me. I want you to know, and he actually passed the church by because he was so overwhelmed. And then he stopped and, oh, there it is. And then he turned around in the seat and he said, I want you to hear me on this. I love you. I love you. And then he took the hand of someone next to him, or of the woman in the front seat. He said, no, look at me. I love you. And 5 years from now, 100 years from now, my community is going to remember this. You might not remember it, but my community will remember this. They'll remember what you did. And that was overwhelming. But the importance of our witness really matters right now. On Friday, everyone did something different. So in our group of clergy from the Pacific Northwest, most of us chose one of two things. I ended up going to an immigrant church, a church led by immigrants, founded by immigrants, in an immigrant neighborhood, and I won't share the name of it. But I ended up going there to learn some things in that community, and I'll get to that in a minute. But a lot of the other clergy from our conference went to the airport. And you might have heard the story that there were 100 clergy that were arrested at the airport. They went through training first, the day before, specific to that particular act of civil disobedience. It was very well orchestrated. It was not, any kind of hint of insurrection. As things are being labeled right now. They called the police of Minneapolis and let them know that it was going to happen. And then they said, we can't always control what's going to happen and who's going to step in to do the arresting. And they said, you have to understand that you could be arrested in this circumstance. And so we're going to try very hard to create a green situation and a red situation. So a green act of civil disobedience is one where it's pretty certain that you're going to be safe. Not 100%, but pretty certain that it'll be a safe action. And then there's a yellow act of civil disobedience where you really don't know how things are going to go. You've got to pay attention to the temperature of the crowd and of the pushback that you're getting. And then there's the red where you know that probably something is going to be volatile and you might get arrested or hurt or injured. So 100 clergy decided to be arrested. Some in our group actually talked about getting arrested, and we talked through, what that would mean and the different routes to legal help that they could get if they were. But ultimately, when they went to the training, it was decided as a group that only clergy from Minnesota would be the ones that stepped over the line and were arrested. And that was incredibly intentional, in part because they get to own that, first of all, in this their home. but also because you always have to think about messaging and about how something is perceived. And the last thing that we want is for it to go out there saying, 4 clergy from Seattle, these outside agitators were arrested. They're the ones coming in from the outside causing problems. We weren't there to cause problems. We were there to support our siblings in faith that asked us to come and support them, and to notice what they're noticing, and to go back and witness to it and to prepare for it should it come in this direction. So those clergy that I know that were at the airport, while 100 clergy stood in a line over the line that they were told not to cross, they got down on their knees. They started praying and singing. And one by one, the Minneapolis police helped them up, zip-tied their hands, and arrested them and took them away. That took a while for 100 to be arrested one by one. So all the rest of the clergy, including those that I know, my friends, stood in front of them with their hands on their shoulders when they could, singing to them, looking them in the eye, praying for them, praying for what they were doing, praying for our country, and praying for justice to rise up. So they came back and they were overwhelmed with that experience. At the same time, and it was so great for us to stay together because we were able to share these things with each other. At the same time that was happening, I was in a church with about 4 others as well, and from our conference of churches. And we were hearing from the pastor of this church about the role that their church plays in the community. And I don't know what you go into those things, or what people go into those things expecting. Like expecting that this church is going to be a loud voice of that's doing all the things, engaging all the actions, everything. What they were really doing was they were sinking into what they could do well, what they could do best. They knew who they were as a church and what they could be to the neighborhood. And so they were doing things like opening their church up at night to be a place of healing. To bring in, they had chairs for doing Reiki, and they had volunteers coming in who were Reiki masters to do Reiki on people, and massage tables to give people massages at the end of the day. They had people coming to just talk and to listen to those that needed a listening ear. They had dances. They put up a disco ball in their fellowship hall, and they're talking about putting one up in their sanctuary, so that in the midst of a neighborhood where ICE has been going door to door and knocking on people's houses and racial profiling and trying to get people that way, they could be a place where there was joy that could be experienced in the midst of pain. They packed, that morning they packed meals. There are about what I heard was there are 16,000 households in Minneapolis, St. Paul, where the people in the household do not feel like it's safe for them to leave their homes. And so food is brought to them by their neighbors, near and far. And friends and neighbors are taking on the work shifts of some people so that they still have an income. People are going out and volunteering to stand on street corners in all directions from schools in the morning and in the afternoon, so that families who don't feel like it's safe for them to walk their kids to school will know that their kids are safe getting to school. In the time that we were there, and we also were able to hear from the pastor actually turn things over to another group that I'll talk about in a minute. But the pastor, well, let me back up here, actually. He said something really good. He said, I don't want to mess it up. He said, "We are a church of yes. We are a church of abundance, not scarcity. We are a church of sanctuary, which is more than what the government gets to designate. We show up in our beauty and our abundance and our possibility. We know it's not going to be perfect, and we're going to do it anyway. And we heard lots of stories of them turning on a dime to respond in the moment to a need. And then we witnessed it happen. I left the sanctuary to go to the bathroom, and so I saw it before they actually announced it in the church. But I was going down to the basement, and in the basement of the church, they also have 3 rooms that they have set up as clinics, like medical rooms with all the supplies and the hospital tables and everything, so that people can come there for treatment by volunteer medical professionals, because a lot of people, it's no longer safe sometimes to go and receive care other places. And so I was down there going past those rooms to use the bathroom, and there was a great hustle and bustle and preparation in the rooms. And when I came out, I heard them saying, "We need everybody to go into the sanctuary. There's been a completed abduction a block and a half away, and people were injured." And so they ended up bringing at least one woman into the church who I heard the windshield had been smashed and she was cut up. And so they carried her into the church to give her treatment. Well, I did what I was told, and I went back to the sanctuary because that's not my role. I'm there for other things. It was, and that was right there. So in 2 days' time, an attempted abduction happened right behind me, and a completed abduction happened on the block, a block and a half away from where I was. I had gathered with other people. And this is what people are experiencing all the time. We heard in the church from a group of, the pastor turned things over to a group of young adults in the community, so that they could share about what their role is, because they've chosen a particular role of watching the ICE vehicles and following them. And I'll say a little bit more about that after our live stream is over. But it is a particular role that was inspiring, and they were always obeying the law, but also one in which they've been threatened a lot, including direct threats to them, being driven to their homes to show them that their license plate has been looked up and we know where you live. It is, but they were inspiring, and it was inspiring to me also that these weren't young adults that went to this church. They were young adults that the pastor turned the church over to share this experience with all of us, because they were willing to do that. And that very much is the way in which Minneapolis St. Paul is working together. Then I think the single greatest lesson that I came home with and that Minneapolis taught me, is that resisting authoritarianism requires trained, sustained resistance in cooperation with your neighbors. And so we need to get to know our neighbors. We need to care for our neighbors. We need to be a neighbor to one another. And we need to engage in hyper-local community organizing. Because if things can happen in 60 seconds, what most matters is the community that you have right around you. I also learned, as I shared about that church, sinking into who they were, the importance of knowing your role. Sometimes I think that we can, and I feel this all the time, I get this sometimes in the church, what are we going to do? What are we going to do about this? We all have a role to play. Everyone there had a role that they were playing. And some of the roles are not glorious and glamorous. Most of the roles are not none of them really are glamorous, but some of them can feel small, but they're all important and they're all connected. When the woman was carried into the church for treatment, and they knew that there were ICE agents in the neighborhood, and the church went on lockdown, we were actually supposed to leave as a group, but we couldn't. And as they were thinking, what to do, the volunteers of the church all streamed into the kitchen and started taking things out of the freezer, out of the refrigerator, and making soup for all of us. Because they said, well, we know how to make food real well. Lots of churches know how to make food, so we're going to feed everybody. And we're going to make something that's comforting to everyone in the midst of this chaos. It seems like a small thing, but in that moment, it was huge. To live into our hospitality and our kindness in the ways that we can, while those with medical training were attending to the woman, and those who were active, to be active in a security role, were standing at the doors, locking all the doors and standing at the doors to make sure that those that came and went had authorization. The neighbors standing on the corners to make sure the kids get to school, the people picking up shifts for people, the people making phone calls just to say what they saw or what somebody else saw and connect one another to each other. It's all important. There are helpers and there are advocates, and there are those working to change laws. There are those that just stay on the phone calling our senators for tomorrow, to raise voice about the budget that is before them, and what it contains, that could continue to fund ICE in huge ways. So there's a role for everyone in this, and it's all important and it's all connected. I think about it like, actually I'm looking at you, Danielle, because I think I preached this at your wedding, like the cedar, redwood trees, redwood trees, they're so majestic and they like stand tall and beautiful, and kind of the singular, beautiful presence, each one of them. But when you think about like their root system is only 5 or 6 feet deep. And the reason that they're able to stand tall and majestic and beautiful is because it's all interconnected. And they're supporting one another in that ability to be strong and tall and majestic in themselves. And that is what Minneapolis is being for one another. They had some infrastructure already for that from, I think I've heard from the time that George Floyd was killed. And so they were able to kind of re-engage what they had already begun at that time, but it is much wider and becoming more intricate, and it has no head. You'll hear from our federal government that they think it's some sort of like Antifa or some sort of mastermind operation, when really it's just good people coming together in those hyper-local ways in their neighborhoods and connecting with one another, and then connecting, that root system outward like the redwoods. And that's really beautiful. So the march the next day, tens of thousands of people came out. I haven't even heard a final count, but it had to have been tens of thousands of people came out, and I heard different things. I heard -20, I heard -38. I don't know, at some point you cease being able to tell. The wind chill was -40, I know that. I know nothing I wore was adequate for it. I had to dip in someplace and replace my heating pads on my toes twice, actually, because they weren't lasting 8 hours like they said they would. But it was inspiring to see everyone that turned out for that on the strike, the general strike that was happening in the city, and how they were there for each other. I never heard so much cursing in my life, but it was really beautiful the way that they were there for one another. I know that I heard from a colleague of mine that they stopped into their hotel near the end of the march and that there were ICE agents lined up against the lobby window, watching the parade. I'm pretty sure that there were 4 ICE agents in front of me in the march as well. I can't prove that, but by the ways that they were kind of talking to each other and mocking a couple things that were being said, it just made me believe that they were probably ICE agents observing and taking note of what was happening. But it was a beautiful thing to go from the church that morning to the march that afternoon, and to see the solidarity that Minnesota has with one another. I know that it buoyed the people that we encountered that were exhausted when we got there. They shared that. You could feel it from that. We could feel it together. And then the next day, we got on my group got on our plane to come back to Seattle. And while we were mid-flight, we heard that Alex Preddy had been executed. And everyone on the flight that I was with, wished that we were still there. Clergy that we knew that were still there were asked to change their plane tickets, and a lot of them did. A lot of them stayed so that they might be there for the other faith leaders, continue to be there for them and for the community in whatever ways that we could. But it was a lot, and it was hard, and we've been asked to stand up and speak out. We've been asked to watch the video frame by frame of Alex being murdered, and so I did that, frame by excruciating frame. And be able to witness to that with eyes, not lies, is the tag on that. But there are many lessons for us to learn here, and I'm only a church pastor. I know what my roles are, and I know what my roles are not. But that is the particular place in which I stand, the particular root ball that I hold as I stretch my roots out to others. And I'm a storyteller, and I'm a preacher, and I can stand in that place. But it's going to take all of us knowing our gifts and coming together for us to live into what this world needs, I think, at this moment in time, especially if we end up encountering anything similar to what Minneapolis is encountering. So I'll stop there. There are other things that I could share, but I just want to make some space for questions. And if you have a question that I can answer, I'll answer it. I might turn a question over to our Immigration Task Force chairs that are here tonight. And if you have a question, though, that I feel is a little bit more sensitive, I might just say, will you hold on to that until the live stream ends, and then I'll answer your question. Anyone? And I'll pass you a mic if you're comfortable using it so that those online can hear what the question is. And if you're not, I'll try my best to repeat it.
Thanks so much for doing this. It's so meaningful, and I can tell just by looking at you how meaningful this experience was to you. So my question is, was the media present during all of this? And can you talk a little bit about what you saw?
The media presence?
Yes.
So actually, one of the workshops I went to was on media and storytelling and the importance of your message. Part of that was, I think, people with media training were part of the discussion around what clergy would step forward to be arrested and which ones wouldn't. So yes, the media were present there as both teachers and present there to observe what was happening as well, and to share that out with the world, which I was very thankful for. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, should have kept the mic back there for you.
Thank you again for sharing your experience. Could you share a little bit more about some of the trainings that you received, and is there a plan to start training us so that we're prepared when it hits here?
So I'll say that the trainings I received there were pretty specific. I'll tell you after the live stream's over, one particular group in particular there that is located more in the Midwest. That's a really good one that offers online trainings. Actually, I can just share that. It's States at the Core is an excellent. They provide excellent training. But we have here many trainings, and I can let our immigration task force chairs speak to some of those.
Yeah, this subject actually came up Sunday when Leah talked too. The primary people who are giving training right now is a group called WASN, which is the Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network. And they give trainings for Know Your Rights and for rapid response. And they do it on a regular basis, once or twice a month. It's all Zoom. You have to register. But if you go to that website, you can find it. The other thing we saw Monday was the National ACLU did a 1-hour training that both Diane and I observed, which was quite helpful because, frankly, tactics have changed, as you know, and ICE has become much more aggressive than anybody ever anticipated would be occurring when these trainings began a year ago. And so they addressed a lot of the issues about how to stay safe. And I think if you went to the National ACLU website, you can probably access that particular site also. Do you have anything to say?
No, that's great.
Mm-hmm. There are trainings in civil disobedience if you want to engage that, but you can choose, again, there's a role for everyone, and you don't have to do all the things. And so thinking about what you might do, and then thinking about what training might be helpful to you in that capacity is important. Okay, I know Jeff had a question, and then you can pass it back to Mary Ann.
I was just curious about faith leaders from non-Christian faiths that you also interacted with.
Yes, yeah. So there were some Hindu leaders there. There were Buddhists. There were a lot of Jewish leaders as well. Some imams. It's it all working together, all like clearly having known each other already. That didn't just come together for this event, but who are there for one another, have been there for one another on an ongoing basis. Which is a beautiful thing, and I think we can learn a lot from. I worry, honestly, I'll tell you, I worry about Seattle because of the ways in which it's so easy here for neighbors not to know each other, and for this to be, I told the group on Sunday, I still don't understand how I can pass somebody on the street, and I come from the Midwest, so I don't understand how I can pass somebody on the street and they not say hi to me. I don't understand that. But there are lots of people who we live in this glorious city, but people we exist in singular ways, and we've got to know our neighbors. We've got to know our neighbors. We've got to be a part of communities and find that strength together.
I was just going to comment that back in the first administration of Trump, a lot of faith leaders started a rapid response network. Mm-hmm. Still functional, has been all along. But granted, an election can occur, as you said, in less than 60 seconds, really, and not be aware. But there are other times where you might see a vehicle that's got the blacked out windows. A lot of times they don't even have valid light. What we would assume, it says U.S. government or whatever. But we might suspect that there are ICE people outside of schools, outside of churches, outside of shopping areas, mini marts, whatever. If you suspect, I assume all of you could just put it on your phone to call 844-724-3737. And if it's a false alarm, don't worry. It's sort of like if you think you smell gas in your house and you call you call on it. They say, we love to come to false alarms. Mm-hmm. And they will also, yes. It's 844-724-3737. So I encourage all of us, that's one thing that we can do. If we are not at a protest or anything else, but if you see something that looks suspicious, please call. And they will investigate to see if there is something.
Do you know the organization that's
It's
behind
Swanson.
It's Wazen or Wisen.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And this was established in Trump's first administration. Mm-hmm. And it's been active ever since.
Thanks, Leah. One thing I haven't heard as much about that I thought I might was school-age children, mm-hmm. and how affected they are and lost if they're new immigrant families, or and often that is the place of their community. So I'm curious if there was talk about teachers and schools and mm-hmm. children and families.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a little bit that I was part of anyway. For instance, the Somali Lyft driver, he talked to us. I asked him, how are your children? And he said to me, oh, they're okay. He said, this is really becoming normal for them. And I thought, no one should ever have to say that. For them to becoming normal, meaning for them to live in fear, for them to live with some family members of their friends disappearing, for them to experience ongoing anxiety, whether it's their own or the anxiety of their family and their community, that's becoming normal to them, to exist in that state of hypervigilance and just not normal. So I heard that. And then I heard about the people who are helping people get to school. Of course, on Wednesday, before the Thursday training happened, we had the news story of the 5-year-old who was taken along with his father. And the way that was spun was that his dad ran away, he abandoned him. Couldn't we take care of children very well, so we took him into custody, and the 5-year-old ended up being detained as well. Well, what wasn't I think shared or was that there were people in the house that were saying, let us take him back in, we're his family, just send him back to us, and that didn't happen. Instead, they chose to detain a little 5-year-old. So those things are happening. There have been infiltration of schools. This is the most disturbing thing I heard, was one of the tactics of ICE are changing. And one of the things that I heard was that there was at least one or a couple schools in the time that we were there that had received notices to pass out to their schools with a lot of free and reduced lunch program, where they were given notices to post that there's this aid network and we're going to provide you with some free food. Why don't you come to this place at this time and we'll give you food. And it's ICE, actually, trying to lure the families out and into that kind of a situation. So those are some of the things that I heard, but I didn't hear comprehensively, in the time I was there.
Hi, Leah. I'm curious about the thinking behind the tactics of the decisions to go to the red zone and be arrested?
Yeah.
And what goes into that? What's it about?
Yeah, so I mean, I haven't engaged in a ton of civil disobedience, but there have been, I've done an act of civil disobedience down at the border too, and it's when you have things like that. If you're with a good group that is used to doing civil disobedience, first of all, you listen to your leader. You listen to the ones that have been trained, and you hopefully receive some training before you engage it yourself. You come prepared. You make sure that you have taken care of what you need to take care of. We were told before we went to Minnesota to get our affairs in order. We were told to make sure that, that if we died, think worst case scenarios in that circumstance. So there's that preparation part of it, but then the act itself, there should always be a leader to it, and there should be a spokesperson. And so that's not something that I don't want to dig too much into it because I'm not a trainer in civil disobedience, and I've only, again, just engaged a few things, but it can be very well orchestrated, and it's meant to get attention is what it's meant to do. And so it was intentional for them to contact the media ahead of time. It was intentional that there would be the 100 that stepped across the line and that they would be arrested. It was intentional that there would be actually 5 rows deep of clergy, who didn't get arrested there with them to support them, so that perhaps the visual of it could be even bigger, although they all wanted to be there. So there's a lot that goes into it, and it's people try to plan it really well, or I appreciate it when it's planned really well. But yeah, that's a little bit. How long did they arrest him? Oh, they didn't even charge them. Yeah. So the Minneapolis police were very kind in that instance, and they didn't even charge them. They just took them in, arrested them there, and took them in, then just let them go. So, yeah.
It was interesting because the media coverage that I could find here was pretty murky.
Yeah.
It wasn't really as clear.
Mm-hmm. But it made newspapers across the country. It made the Rachel Maddow show. So they saw that and they're like, okay, it mattered. Mm-hmm. There you go. Yeah.
So we see with the ice from the surge, and we don't know where they're going to go next. But like they pepper spray somebody, and then they tackle them, and then they jump on them and start beating on them, and they're yelling at them the whole time. And it's impossible. Like put your hands behind your back, stand up, sit down, do all at the same time. Mm-hmm. You're going to get it wrong. Any advice or idea on how to protect yourself when you really can't comply?
Mm. Yeah, I'm not the right person to speak to that. Other than, I think we can take a lot of lessons from Black Americans in this country, in the civil rights movement, and how they engaged civil disobedience. I mean, they joined together in singing. There's actually a singing resistance group in Minneapolis right now who it disorients people and takes them down a notch when you engage in like singing in front of them. It's harder for them to reason that as a threat. There are certain things that you can do that make you less threatening, that you can think about. How do I make myself less threatening? Which the number one thing is you can not do it. You can choose to do something else that's supportive of it and leave that to someone else. But there could arise a time where we find ourselves in that situation, and so what do? It's something that we have to think about ahead of time, and praying, speaking, words of kindness in that moment. At the same time, I don't know. I'm not the right person to ask, but again, I'd point back to reading about and studying what Black Americans did in the civil rights movement. Yeah. Here we go, over there. Thanks.
I'm just really astounded at the organization of the community. And I'm wondering about the timeline. I mean, you said that they had some infrastructure since George Floyd, but I mean, is the organizing mostly, just neighborhoods, or is it organizations, or and did it happen, before, when they knew that that ICE was coming, or did it happen just after they were there? I'm just trying to understand how they were able to be so organized.
Yeah. So there's a lot going out on the internet that you can look for in Minneapolis. So I'll just, I'll probably be doing my own Google searches. So, I'd encourage us to study Minneapolis. But yes, in part the neighborhoods, yes, it is hyper-local organization around with Signal chats. So your neighborhoods are on Signal. You have your Signal chats, specifically the app Signal, so that your messages disappear and it's encrypted. And they are, although you have to assume always that anything that you put out there there's going to be infiltration into those groups. But they are hyper-local, organized, or the organizations are seeking to come alongside those groups of people. What do you need? What have you heard in your neighborhood is needed? What are you noticing? How can we help? There's a real ego suppression that is happening that's important too, that we heard loud and clear. Like churches aren't trying to lead the way. They're not trying to look like they're the saviors of this whole thing. They're seeking to, everybody asking, what are our gifts? What is our unique thing that we can do? And how do we sink well into that alongside the movement of what's happening here for the good of all? So, here's that. Thanks.
I'm going to assume that most of you are like I am. You're not really big rabble-rousers. But when you mentioned about organizations and training and that, WASN, just Google search Washington Immigration Solidarity Network. They have all sorts of different places, neighborhoods where they do it. Seattle Indivisible, you can Google search that one too. So many local things, Hiawatha Park in West Seattle Junction, they're designated so we don't have to go far, or Alki Beach where the statue, we're going to have a gathering there. And so you can decide, but the other thing I think is really important, that also on those websites for them, and they contact you, they offer like the funding for ICE. You'll get, here's a real easy click, where you can sign up and voice your preferences or your feelings that way. And we still are protected. I mean, the other thing about WASN, they have so many legal beagles that are trying to only do what is legal. So I think it's a very safe organization to read what they put out. But the other thing we can all do is, when we see someone who looks a little different than us, just look them in the eye and smile and say hello. Just to convey, I care about you. Or not everybody's scary. Just look somebody in the eye and say hello. It's easy.
Well, thank you all. Thanks for coming tonight. I'm a little tired, so I appreciate you being here as I ramble along, trying to share this over and over with different groups since I came back. But I hope that you've heard loud and clear that that we need to be a we in this. We're going to have to lean on one another because sustained resistance is how communities withdraw consent from authoritarian systems. And it's not going to be one march. It's not going to be one protest. It's going to be all of us doing what we can with each other together in order to be what we need to be here in Seattle. And there is an increased ICE presence in Seattle, and we need the eyes to see it before it becomes worse. Thank you all. Appreciate you being here.